Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're catching up on this latest video. And welcome to this week's video where we're going to be doing a preview of Game Week 32, which is a very spread out game week, not going to lie. It doesn't look like a normal standard game week because it falls over about a week and a half, if not nearly 2 weeks. So it's very spread out, and it also offers the chance of a double game week for a certain Tottenham Hotspur. But before we dive into this week's video, I just wanted to thank you for the support so far on the channel, especially last week. The wildcard video did particularly well. Second most viewed video on the channel, so I appreciate everyone's support. If it's just subscriptions, likes, or even views at this point, I really appreciate all of you. And if you want to check us out on Twitter and Twitch, where we stream, you can check out the links which are down on your screen currently. And we will get into the video. Right, so as I mentioned, this week is very spread out. As you can see, you've got games from Friday to the Thursday after, so literally 2 weeks worth of fixtures put into one game week, which is kind of around the FA Cup to get as many people into the same game week in terms of FPL and cutting out a lot of single game weeks and double game weeks that could have been happening. But the key part of this week is the only team that does have a double game week is Spurs. So the Spurs assets, before you even get into the fixtures, you've got to be thinking of, even if they don't play particularly well, at least you're just guaranteed the 4 starting points. Obviously, we want a lot more than that, but it's a good place to start. You can't complain. And then just on the side note of that, there isn't another team that actually doubles in this game week. Crystal Palace don't play at all in the game week. So not that many people will have many Crystal Palace players, but if you do have them, make sure you're not playing them this week. Right, so we're going to run through the fixtures that we normally do. So the starting fixture is one of the double game week fixtures for Spurs. So I think I'm going to pick out the two Spurs fixtures just from the offset, and we'll start with those two. So I think actually the Everton Spurs game is quite a difficult game for Spurs. So on the face of it, double game week, I think a lot of people are going to go for Spurs assets. I wouldn't say the fixtures are particularly great, but I wouldn't use that as a point to stop you doing it, like going for your Spurs options, because we know like the Kane, for example, can do it against anyone. And Everton aren't great defensively, so they're still can be got at. I can see this being pretty close, maybe a 2-1 Spurs kind of game. So when we're talking about Spurs, I think like the big elephant in the room is Kane. If you don't have Kane for this game week, you've got to do basically anything you can to get him in for this game week. Obviously, don't take like a -16 for him, but -4, even -8, you could argue that Kane could be worth it in this game week. I would never recommend over a -4, but if you've not got Kane, you'd definitely be thinking about that. So, along with Kane, I think the second best option will be Son, which, as we've seen, especially at the earlier stage of the season, are the must-have Spurs players. And then the third option, as I think you should be looking to be trebling up on Spurs, if you haven't already. The one thing to be wary about that is if you do triple up on Spurs, they have a blank game week next week as well. So you've got the upside of getting Spurs players in for this week. Hopefully we've got a few already, but then you have to be wary you don't have to bench them all next week or transfer them out again. So, for example, if you've got a Kane and Son already, there might not be a lot of value in you getting in that third asset because you're just going to have to transfer them out anyway. So you can easily ride through this week with two. If you've already got two, I'd probably recommend you getting that extra one because one transfer here and there isn't too bad, and you can always bench them next week to get through next week. And actually, after the blank game week, Spurs fixtures are pretty good. I think they have Sheffield United and another decent fixture, so they're not bad assets to hold going forward anyway. If you do need to bench them next week, so if I was choosing a third option there, the one that keeps jumping to my head every time is Reguilon if you're going for a defender, because Davis, I know, has got an injury, so it's quite unlikely he's going to get rotation at the minute unless Davis returns to fitness. And they've not got Europa anymore, so it's not going to get rotated. So if you're looking for a third option and you wanted a defensive player, I'd say you've got Reguilon's the best defender in my opinion because you can get attacking returns. If you just want to go for a safe bet and definitely going to play, just go for Lloris. But there's not particularly a lot of value in changing your goalkeeper if you've got some solid options already. So if you're going to keep them in for the rest of the season, so if you're going to bring Lloris in and he's going to be a keeper for the rest of the season, I see value in that. But not if it's going to be a quick transfer in and out. There's not a huge amount of value. So a good strategy could be to get Lloris in. You've got a cheap goalkeeper, for example, Forster, who plays next. Does he play next week? But for example, he would be a cheap option who you could have who will play next week, but then you won't really play him for the rest of the season. You'd have to double check with the fixtures to make sure they tie in with how you want to play for the rest of the season. There are a lot of goalkeepers that actually do complement each other for the rest of the season and the fixtures. So, for example, if Martinez has got a difficult fixture, you could have someone else who complements him. So now if you're bringing in Lloris, you need to be looking at the whole season kind of plan. So if we refer to the other fixture that Spurs have got, they've got Southampton. So they're at home against Southampton. You're never sure what Southampton team's going to turn up. So you could easily see like a 3 or 4-0 here for Spurs, but then you could also see Southampton turning up and beating them. So, like I said, still go for your Spurs assets, but they're not the easiest fixtures you've ever seen. I'm not expecting both games to be like 4 goals in each, as we saw in the previous game week when Spurs had some decent fixtures. I think was it Burnley and Crystal Palace that did pretty well against. Even Bale got on the score sheet back then. So like Bale's not the worst punt I've ever seen, but it's not guaranteed he's going to play every game, so he's not necessarily the one I'd be going for. So as we mentioned Spurs, we have to mention the other side on Everton and Southampton at the same time. So if you haven't got Everton or Southampton assets at the minute, I would not be particularly bringing them in for these fixtures. If you've got a Digne or someone, fair enough, keep them in the team for this week. You've probably got better fixtures that you'll utilise them later on. But I definitely wouldn't be bringing in for any of those teams for this game week. There is the potential chance of an Everton double game week later on because they've still got the fixture against Villa to be rearranged. So it might be somewhere you don't particularly have to transfer them out, but I wouldn't be bringing extra people in for that. So while we're talking about the Spurs fixtures, as we're going to talk about the captains anyway, we'll talk about the captains as we go along. So I think I can imagine about 90% of the whole community will go for Kane as captain. Kane for captain is the most obvious pick. A few people I can imagine will also consider going for Son, which is probably equally as valuable. He seems to be back in fitness and a bit of form as well. So Kane and Son are definitely the most obvious standout options for this week. If you want to stick with the Spurs but go with more differential than a regular one, no issue with that as well. But I think if I'm recommended, you've got to have to go for Kane if you want to be slightly against the curve and maybe get a bit of advantage out of this, go for Son. But I think you've got to stick to that Spurs, especially when they're only team that doubles in this week. So there are a few other options that you could captain from the single game week fixtures. A prime example would be this Newcastle against West Ham game. So at the minute, Jesse Lingard is on form, definitely. So I could see this game actually being pretty like some of West Ham's previous games, where they score but then they also concede. I could see this being a 3-1 or a 3-2 to West Ham. So Lingard's not the worst bet for a captaincy punt, but with the fact that Spurs have got a double game week, I wouldn't be going there. But I think West Ham assets for this fixture will do pretty well. So Lingard is their prime target. It looks like Bowen's going to get a lot of starts now that Antonio's out as well. He might play as a striker. He can also play out wide. He seems to be a lot more favoured than, for example, a Benrahma. And I feel like he'll start in front of Fornals as well. So I feel like Lingard, if you want a bit differential, then go for Bowen. But the price of Lingard, you may as well go for him anyway. And at the minute, there's not a great value in West Ham's defence. They seem to be conceding, but they should easily keep a clean sheet against Newcastle, you would hope. But they seem to be giving away a few sloppy goals at the other end, West Ham. But Kufal keeps getting in with the odd assist that you could be bringing in if you need an extra defender. Not a bad option. Even a Dawson could come in with a goal somewhere as well. I think that I'd be keeping an eye on Wilson in the very few last games of the season. But Newcastle have a very hard run, including this West Ham game, so I won't particularly go for a Newcastle asset at all at the minute. So we move on to someone else with a decent run of fixtures. We've got Wolves. Like, firstly, they've got a good run of fixtures, Wolves. So having an asset or two in there is not a bad option. I know a lot of people brought in Neto for the last fixture and then got injured. So there's some doubt over if he will play. So I would not be going for a Neto at this point. Podence has come back to fitness, but you can't guarantee he's going to play 90 minutes. Then you'd be going for a striker as well. So there's a lot of doubt around their attacking assets at the minute. So ideally, you'd have one in for this fixture. It's a perfect fixture against Sheffield United, but there's a lot of doubt around them assets. You could even go for like a Fabio Silva, but then you've got a bit of rotation with the William Jose as well. So there's a lot of doubt about those attacking assets. So I'm not overly convinced by them at the minute. But if you wanted to go for a Connor Cody or even a Semedo, I don't think you'd particularly want to put all your money into Semedo, but they've got a decent run, so if you want to pop into him for a few weeks, that's me throwing a pen across the desk there, guys. It's not the worst option, but I think you can use the value elsewhere rather than putting it into a Semedo. Right, so we move on to Arsenal against Fulham. Arsenal seem to be on a decent run of form at the minute, to be fair. Like Lacazette is getting a few goals. So Arsenal aren't the worst punt at the minute, to be fair. I'd only really be looking at Lacazette and maybe a cheap defender such as Holding, as obviously they had Sheffield United in the last fixture. They don't give you a lot of clean sheets, but Fulham also don't score a lot of goals. I can see Fulham 1 or 2 goals max, really, in any fixture they are in. So there isn't a huge risk of Arsenal conceding, but you know what Arsenal are like. Like, they could win 5-1, but they're still going to concede just to ruin your clean sheet. But if I'm looking at this fixture, I'd probably say it's probably like an Arsenal 2-1. So Lacazette's not the worst punt. And Arsenal's fixtures aren't too bad going forward, but you need to be wary of them still being in the Europa League if they're prioritising the Europa League. But Lacazette does seem to be in favour at the minute and he's scoring goals, so sometimes I think, from a manager's point of view, just keep playing a striker when he's on form. So even if there is some rotation, you could see Lacazette playing most of the games anyway. So it's not the worst punt I've seen, but there's probably still better options. For example, a certain Leicester forward who's a bit cheaper, who we could be going for at the minute if we've not already got them, of course. So there's some value in the Arsenal assets. It's not my first place I'd be going for a transfer. So we move on to Manchester United against Burnley. I'd expect Manchester United to win this probably 2-0, 3-1 kind of scoreline. Like, slightly comfortable, but not running away with the game, because Burnley always seem to put up a decent fight whoever they're playing against. And Bruno's the most obvious option. I could see a few people actually captaining Bruno in this fixture. It's a decent fixture. If this was single game weeks, a lot of people would be captaining Bruno, I feel. It would be a toss-up between Lingard, Bruno, and a Leicester asset, I would think, if it was a single game week, or maybe even a Liverpool asset. But Bruno is a standout. If I was going for a defender, you'd go for a Luke Shaw. It's the most obvious one. Wan-Bissaka had a decent game against Spurs, but he doesn't always particularly look like he's going to be involved with an assist, so I'd still be going for Shaw. And a bit of a differential pick on United at the minute would be Greenwood. He's not the cheapest asset to own, but I feel like he deserves a run of games now. He came off the bench against Spurs, did very well, getting a goal and an assist in about the space of the last 15 minutes. So I feel like he needs to get a run of games now, and if you want him a bit of differential to a Bruno and to help you with your rank slightly, I'd expect him to get a run of games and hopefully he can contribute and get you a few green arrows, shall we say, up the rankings, as we all need at this stage of the season. So we move on to Leeds against Liverpool, which I think is probably going to be one of the best games of the week, I'm hoping. We saw what Leeds did to Man City, and I feel like we'll get a mixture between that defensive style of Leeds, but they will be a bit more expressive at home as well. So I can see this being a very end-to-end exciting game. I could easily see like a 2-2, a 3-2 to either side really here. Well, that's what I hope for, fingers crossed. So I'm not convinced that I'd be backing any defensive assets in this game. famous last words as a member of the Dallas benching club from the last game. So Dallas scores twice. Obviously, don't keep a clean sheet against Man City, but he still gets a great return of 17 points, which I unfortunately missed out on. We'll take a stab to the heart with that one. But I won't particularly like if you've got a Trent or a Dallas, I'd probably still consider playing them just because they've got their attacking returns. But if you've got like a Nat Phillips or someone for Liverpool who's not got that attacking potential, I wouldn't particularly, unless you've got a terrible defensive options. There's not a lot of benefit if you play them in this game because I can easily see Leeds scoring 1 or 2 goals in this game and Liverpool likewise. So there's not a lot of value in there. I might still have to play Dallas just out of spite because I need to recover from that 17-point loss. But it should be a really exciting game. I'm hoping for there. The Leeds assets are pretty standard. You've got one in each position. Dallas, Rafinha, and Bamford. If you've got them, just keep them. I think they've got Liverpool and then another difficult fixture, and then their fixtures actually turned quite well back the other way. So there's no issue you're holding these players. I won't be bringing them in for this fixture, but hold on to them. And then Liverpool, Salah, Jota, and then Trent are the big three. If you've not got 2 of those already, you really need to have them, especially because of the rest of the season. Liverpool's run, in my opinion, got the easiest run in the league. Apart from playing against United, the rest of the fixtures they should easily be winning going forward. So if you're not on Liverpool bandwagon, you need to be getting on it. I'd probably say 2 players is the maximum strategy for now. Get through that United game and then probably bring in the third as well. So there should be a lot of points for Liverpool going forward, and probably in this game week as well. So we go to Chelsea against Brighton. I don't know particularly what to make of Chelsea sometimes. You can see off the back of the last 2 fixtures, they've lost 5-2 to West Brom and then they've won 4-1 at Palace. Palace are on the beach though, so I don't take a lot of value from that result. Palace just think they're safe, so there's not a lot of value in like looking at that 4-1 and saying Chelsea are going to batter Brighton as well. I think Brighton are actually a solid team, so I think this game won't be too one-sided, but I could easily see Chelsea winning like 2-0, but Brighton could easily edge a goal. So if you've got Chelsea defenders, definitely play them in this fixture. I think probably jumping on the Chelsea was probably a thing you should have been doing about 2 weeks ago. You jumping onto a Chelsea defender. Obviously, that hasn't paid off in the last 2 weeks. But if you've got 1 or 2 Chelsea defenders, that's fine. I wouldn't be bringing any more in because at the end of the season, they have a bit of a fixture swing where they're not as easy as you would hope for, and there's not the guarantee of clean sheets. Not that any fixture is a guarantee of clean sheets, as we saw against West Brom, but the ship might have sailed on their defence. I think the I think the best asset for Chelsea going forward or a midfield would definitely Mason Mount. If you want to be a bit differential, Pulisic and Havertz could get you a bit of a rank boost, but it's hit and miss again. You haven't got a lot of guaranteed points there. Like you can easily have, like I've just mentioned, the last 2 fixtures, 1-4-1 against Palace, but then lost to West Brom. I don't have a lot of faith in some of their assets at the minute. So if you have them again, keep them, but it's not who I'd be bringing in at this point. So we've mentioned the Spurs game. Again, going on to the next fixture, which I say it's this week. It's going to be a week on, well, about 2 weeks from now at this point, which would be Villa against Man City, which I think could again be a pretty tight game. There's some games I see this week that are pretty one-sided and then quite a few tight games as well. So the Villa Man City game, I think, will be quite influenced by the games Man City have around it, because they've got Champions League, they've got the League Cup, they've got the FA Cup, and especially as you saw from the Leeds game, there was a lot of rotation, and I think City are taking the eye off the ball slightly with the league, and this fixture falls in between 2 cup ties. So if they're going to rest any players in any game, it's going to be this game, which is a slightly risky strategy because they shouldn't give away the league, but it just brings it a bit closer. But then it's just an absolute nightmare trying to predict Pep Roulette. So my approach to Pep Roulette at the minute is just avoid Man City assets. If you've got 1 or 2, accept that they probably won't play. As long as you've got a strong bench, that's not an issue. If you're considering going for like a KDB or a Sterling, that is not what I would recommend doing, because that's a lot of value into a player that you're not guaranteed to play. And I'm not particularly. I think you need to be investing in your team elsewhere rather than doing that. So I've no issue be sticking with a defender like a DS or a Stones. That makes complete sense. But if you're going for a midfield, I'd rather you go for a Foden or someone which you're going to save value on rather than going for a KDB or Sterling, because for that value you could be just getting a Salah who you know is going to play most of the games. So I don't see the value in having those high value assets. So like I said, I could easily see this game only having a few goals in it, like 2-1 either way or a 1-1. Especially like I said with City's rotation, depends what team they're going to play. Like trying to predict that in advance as well when they've got all the cup ties and Champions League and everything to play as well is quite difficult. So City assets in general for the rest of the season, I'm just trying to avoid. If you have to have one or two, just accept the rotation and then hope it pays off for you once in a while. But yeah, Villa again for this fixture, I think a lot of people have Martinez. I have no issue playing Martinez in this game because it's quite likely he'll get some save points. They might be looking to get the clean sheet. Depends what Man City turn up, really. But again, it should be a tight fixture. I won't particularly be targeting that fixture. Talking of fixtures to target, the next one should hopefully be a free-flowing game. I expect Leicester to score quite a few. It wouldn't surprise me if West Brom scored at the other end if they play like they did against Chelsea. I could easily see this being like a 4-1, 4-2 kind of scoreline. So I think the most obvious pick for Leicester at the minute is Iheanacho up front. He's not so much cheaper than Vardy. He's ridiculously priced. I think he's at 5.9 at the minute, which is a great price for what he can offer. And Leicester have, including this West Brom fixture, I think it's the next four fixtures are the best for anyone in the league. So at this point, if you've not brought him in on your wildcard or equivalent, you need to be targeting him. I would have, Vardy is not the worst option I've seen. It's just, if you compare Vardy to Iheanacho at the minute, you're getting so many points for so little value in Iheanacho, so you may as well just go for him instead. I was going to say before the weekend I'd be recommending Maddison, but depends how the COVID breach goes down. I fully expect him to play probably against West Brom because there's a lot of time between that period, but you've got that slight doubt there. If a Harvey Barnes was fit, I'd be recommending him as well. I think you can also go into the defence here. I think Leicester definitely need Sayonchu back to make their defence a lot more solid. But I can easily see them getting 2 clean sheets in this run going forward. So a Leicester defender going forward is a decent option as well. So I think Leicester, if you've not got them in already, should be targeting them, especially because of their run of fixtures are really good. So based on that, I've touched on most of the captaincy picks there. So I'd be going for Kane. Kane is just obvious, and Son. I wouldn't suggest that you're out of that. If you want to go for a different captain, I'd be going for a Bruno. Or if you want a bit differential, like a Greenwood, you could possibly go for a Liverpool asset. Probably Salah's your safest bet. If you want to go for a bit of Trent as well, why not? And then I'd be going for Leicester as well. There's Spurs and then 3 other teams to target in terms of captaincy and probably players to bring in. Oh, and also Lingard from West Ham. Well, I managed to miss out there. But if you're looking to bring players in for this week, I'd definitely be targeting West Ham because, the fixture run for the rest of the season is pretty decent. They've got a few fixtures dotted in there, got quite difficult, for example, the Chelsea game. But around that, every other game they always have a decent fixture. So they're a good one you can hold for the rest of the season. Which at this point in time you probably want to be thinking of that because you've only got about 6-7 weeks left, and you need to be avoiding they're going to be in for 2 weeks and get them out kind of thing. No issue with you if it's a high value asset, but for example, a West Ham asset, they're not going to be high value, so you don't really want to chop and change them all the time. So obviously I mentioned Spurs. They do have some value going forward, so obviously target Spurs, especially for this week. And if you can get through next week, bear in mind next week, Man City and Spurs don't play. So I'm talking about game week 33 here. So ideally, don't have too many of those assets in your team, otherwise you're going to have to transfer them out. If you've got 3 assets between those 2 teams, that's perfect because you can bench them all. But just be wary of that next week. So we mentioned United, Liverpool as well. You need to be getting on their assets if you're not there already. Salah, Jota, and Trent, as I mentioned, and they have the best fixtures in my opinion, barring the Man United game, which I think might be after the Leeds game or the one after that. So definitely triple Liverpool going forward if possible, and then Leicester is also the one. For about 4 or 5 weeks, they have got an outstanding fixture run, so definitely need to be going for them as well. So I hope this video again has been useful, guys. If you've got any comments on the content or anything, or if you just have questions on your team, I'm more than happy to help. Just leave comments down below in the comment section or reach out to me on Twitter or Twitch. I have no issue with that as well. Always here to help. And again, thank you for the support so far. And this will probably be the only video this week, which, well, as you can see, it's quite spread out. So we might have another video next week. Looking forward probably to the next game week, but this is spread over 2 weeks. So we'll have a think about the content we'll do outside of this, but this will be your main video for this week. And I hope you enjoy, and I will see you on the next one. Good night.